Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Hi, Evan.
What's up? We've done that like so many times.
Have we really?
Oh yeah. That's like we've done that at least 2 or 3 times before. What's up?
Well, whatever. Whatever. It's great. It's classic. It's legendary, and it will never die.
Topical, always topical.
It's always topical.
Yep.
Yeah, we're a couple of buds.
Yep.
We've drank a couple of buds.
Yep.
You know.
Not recently, but yeah.
Yeah, it's been a minute for me. No, they make a non-alcoholic beer. I had a couple of those. Like the first hot day of the year, I was out for a walk, and I was walking by my like neighborhood liquor store, and I used to go in there all the time, right? Like all the time.
Yeah.
And it's been now like I might pop in there once a year, twice a year. Like I don't usually keep NA beers even in the house just because like it's like drinking soda. But like occasionally it's the right move. It's like a hot day, and so I popped in there, and all they had for NA beer was like the Guinness, which is fine, or they had like these like NA Budweisers, and I got those, and they were fine.
Yeah.
I digress. Welcome. We are doing a rare thing this week. You know, we do series of episodes within this show all the time, and a lot of the time, we don't record them sequentially, but we're doing it this week.
Yeah,
and we're probably going to do it next week.
And by the way, the name of the show, that's Left Unread. What's going on, everybody? I'm
Yeah.
Evan. This is
Cam. Hi. I think I already said that, but maybe I didn't. But you're listening to Left Unread.
Yeah.
And we're going to do part 2 of the series that we released last week that I've been working on about the Reconquista and El Cid. And I've been trying to kind of just like write it out and get it all done and do them in a row. So I think, so we're going to do part 2 of the narrative this week. And then I think our plan tentatively right now is to watch the difficult to find 1961 film El Cid starring Charlton Heston. Which, we're going about. But we've secured, I think, the ability to watch that, and it's not streaming anywhere. So I didn't realize that when I initially planned to do this. But it's I think that makes it cooler because it's probably less available for people to see. And
a nice little fascist propaganda flick.
Yeah, and so we'll watch that and we'll talk about that, and I'll give a little more detail on the funding behind that film and the story of the making of that film, which is itself pretty interesting and I think ties into our narrative here. Sure. But I think the layout of this episode covers a good bit of what will be in that movie, from what I understand. We're not going to get completely through the life of El Cid this week. So my plan this week, we're going to we left off last time talking about the collapse of the Caliphate of Cordoba, and how the Christian kings in the north of Iberia were kind of licking their chops. And there's a lot to talk about there still, so we're going to kind of talk more about that and the rise of the new sort of power that will show up in the power vacuum created by the Taifa system. And then we're going to talk for the next half of the episode just about like El Cid, because he kind of crops up in real life in the narrative. We know he's been alive through a lot of these events, but there's not much about him. So a lot of the stuff is kind of supplemental, like what was going on during the time that we know he was probably learning about or hearing about, but we don't really know what he was up to. And then, in his like late teens, early 20s, he shows up in the story, and so we'll wedge him in there.
Yeah.
But so let's get to it. Without further ado, let's start the show. And then we'll start kind of doing exactly that.
Yes, let's do that.
So just a gentle reminder, as I said, this is part 2 of a series, and I do like to remind people whenever we do series that we do maintain a Spotify playlist where we add series episodes, like sub-series episodes in sequential order. This will still be on that, but as I said, luckily for you guys, it's actually releasing in sequential order, so the last episode is just last episode, number 158. I definitely recommend that you listen to that first, because it is... I'm not going to do much more recap than I've already just done, because it's a waste of time.
Yeah, and let's be totally clear, there are sickos out there that listen to these out of order, and that's weird, and you should feel bad for doing that, so listen in order.
Yeah, I mean, part of that's on us, because we don't always release it. Well, we never release in order. I think this is the first time we've ever done it.
Yeah.
And, hey, who's to say? I understand that there's maybe some mechanical flaw inherent in us doing that, but
no,
it's just
the flaw is in the listeners. You are flawed, listeners.
You are all
We are
flawed.
trying to make you better in the eyes of God and man, and so just do what we tell you. Listen in order, please. Don't be a sicko.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, don't be a sicko.
Yeah.
All right, so let's fucking just do the thing.
Yeah.
So last time, you probably remember, I went out of my way to reiterate that the balance of power prior to the dissolution of the Umayyad Caliphate of Cordoba in 1031 CE was extremely heavily in favor of the Muslim lords in the southernmost kind of 2/3 of the Iberian Peninsula.
Yes.
This reached a zenith point under the exalted warlord Almanzor, who was undeniably a stud, at least when it came to being a big military strongman type of guy.
Yeah.
But it all fell apart after his death, and whoops, looked like you undermined the entire power structure of the Caliphate. Sucks to suck.
Yeah, but it is always sick to be described as exalted.
I
wish one day I will be remembered as exalted.
He was in the top tier of military minds of the day. But what he wasn't planning for was the continued stability of the realm that he was kind of usurping the power of.
Yeah.
So the balance of power has now shifted dramatically, and you have these initial 33 taifas that form after the fall of the Caliphate, sort of cannibalizing and blobbing amongst themselves in the south. And you have the Christian kings and lords in the north suddenly kind of on more equal footing. If anything, they now have sort of a slight advantage because they've been doing this whole, a realm-divided internal struggle thing for centuries at this point. It's kind of their entire jam. The changing allegiances, the complex and ever-shifting tributary structure, the court intrigue and betrayal, and this whole might is right ethos that we associate so often with the medieval period in Europe as a whole has been the reality for the Christian kings in northern Iberia now for centuries. And it's not that the Muslim lords in the south aren't also, warriors or don't have skilled warriors in their employ, but they have, until now, been vassals in a relatively stable and well-administered realm. And so they aren't quite as inured to the chaos as the Christian kings are up north.
And
it's sort of like...
I was just going to say, it's always nice to be a vassal in a stable realm.
Dude, yeah.
Well-administered, like, you're just living, you've got your little fiefdom.
And all it takes is some, over-ambitious vassal like Almanzor to be like, hey, listen, I think I could do it better. Next thing you know, boom, 33 taifas.
We hate seeing that ambitious trait come up in our vassals.
Yeah, dude, no. We want loyalty.
Yeah.
I'll even fucking settle. If they're not like a border vassal,
yeah.
I'll even like to see Craven, dude. I want cowards with, high, diplomatic and administrative skill.
Yeah.
Low martial skill.
Yeah.
Because if I got to, I want to know I can swoop in there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Once again, this is a sponsored podcast from Paradox Interactive. Big fans of Crusader Kings.
We got it.
We're just saying that in advance until they do send us the money.
We are imploring you, Paradox, please pay us for this free fucking advertising.
I've literally had people
quite
in real
literally
life,
every episode.
I've had people in real life be like, dude, I downloaded that game because of you.
Yeah.
Now that's 2 or 3 times that's happened. People have been like, dude, I bought that game because you said it was so sick.
Yeah.
And so
so we got it in under 10 minutes today. That's very good. All right, Paradox.
Yeah,
I expect you to comp me for the rest of the DLC for Crusader Kings 3 any day now, please.
Yeah, and you can reimburse me. I couldn't hold out. I like that game way too much.
Yep.
All right. So anyway, it's kind of like, that famous like meme of Bane in Dark Knight whatever being like, you merely adopted the dark. Like, it's that. These guys have lived for generations now with this kind of chaos. And so they see this opportunity arising in the South.
Yeah.
They've noted it, and they get to work pretty much immediately on flipping the script here.
There's chop licking going on.
Oh, they're drooling.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So where for centuries the general trend had been for Christian lords and kings, especially the weaker ones, paying tribute to the Caliph and his powerful border lords in the south, the mid-11th century saw an increasing number of newly independent Muslim-led taifas, which, remember, are these sort of city-states that tend to, at least when they're initially formed, and there's 33 of them, they tend to be sort of focused around one central major city and then kind of like the farmlands and villages and whatever around that city. They do quickly sort of start attacking each other and blobbing up.
Yeah.
So by the time of there's already fewer than 33, and it's a kind of ever shifting number. But now some of these independent Muslim-led taifas are entering into similar contracts for protection with their Christian counterparts. The Christian kings looked down on the now beautiful, and I don't mean just like metaphorically look down. I mean like they're kind of up in the north in the mountains, and they're like, well, look at it, fucking looks nice down there. And they see these fertile, irrigated lands of the south with their relatively sparse defenses and all that beautiful, vital, yet oh so destroyable infrastructure, and start launching lightning raids southwards, destroying irrigation canals, burning farms, inflicting huge economic damage on their southern counterparts. And they knew how costly and time-consuming repairs to these systems, which they themselves didn't really have the expertise to build. Like, so to them, it's like they're breaking like alien magic technology.
Yeah.
They knew how costly repairing these things would be and how vital they were to the wealth of the taifas, which at this point was still substantial.
Yeah.
And so naturally, it behooved the wealthy Muslim lords to enter into protectorate status with the kings of the north to prevent further incursions. It's a lot like what the Vikings liked to do, kind of honestly a little bit before, but around this same time, like in Northern Europe. It was like, you launch these lightning raids, and if you can just convince some like weaker king to be like, listen, I'll just like give you some land or give you a bunch of gold. It's like a lot of times
please.
that's like just as good. It's like, honestly, money's the goal.
Yeah.
So if I don't even have to swing a sword, great. So a lot of these initial raids are kind of just being like, hey, look, you see what we can do? If you just give us money, we won't do that.
Yeah.
So it's classic. No.
I was gonna say it's. I didn't even see your next line here. I was gonna say
it's okay.
Classic, protection racket going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This still happens on a smaller scale. It's gangster shit.
Yeah.
So historians call these contracts in Spanish parias, which literally translates to pariahs or outcasts, which sums up the shifting historical view of lords engaged in this behavior kind of nicely. So we'll refer to parias contracts a lot in this episode. One rising star of this new game, who Nora Berend highlights, is in her excellent book, which is the book that we're using for the show, and I should shout her out again quickly. This is, of course, El Cid, The Life and Afterlife of a Medieval Mercenary by Nora Berend. Came out last year, 2024, I think towards the end of the year. And I've used that a lot as like the narrative structure for this. It's a fun read. I recommend it. I initially bought it to read for pleasure, and it's now turned into what will probably be 4 or 5 episodes. So definitely a recommend on that. But so one rising star who Nora Berend highlights in that book is Fernando, the Count of Castile. And he comes onto the scene around the time of Rodrigo's birth, or El Cid, our protagonist, if you will.
Yeah.
So he initially was serving as a border lord under his brother-in-law, King Vermudo III of Leon. Vermudo, another really great Spanish king name.
Yeah, Bermudo.
Bermudo.
Yeah.
Bermudo. el tercero. Yo soy Bermudo. So by 1037, he had so enriched himself and expanded his power that he declared war on his own liege, which, again, we hate to see it, folks. We really hate to see it.
These vassals be trifling, you know?
They be trifling. They're fucking my claims. So he overthrows Bermudo, and he usurps the kingdom for himself as King Fernando the First, el primero. Yo soy Fernando. Okay, so he's now Fernando.
Yep.
Henceforth baroned, and a lot of historians refer to this new kingdom as Leon Castile. As I sort of mentioned last time.
Leon.
Yeah, Castile y Leon. It is really common for the existing kingdoms and duchies and counties, blah, 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 to glom together for a while under, like, the personal union of a king, and then they'll split apart again, and yada, yada, yada. Yep. So it appears that even though Castile was sort of like a county, it was a very powerful border county. The name literally comes from the word for castle, and it was sort of one of the vanguard border forts or fortifications between the Taifas and Christendom, therefore was extremely strong and built up. And even though it was considered subordinate to the King of Leon prior to this, it was not officially incorporated into the realm. So when Fernando takes over the Kingdom of Leon, it is now officially, it's all one realm.
Yeah.
It's sloppy.
Yeah.
You know. So Fernando would then begin a series of conquests south of the Douro River in what is now Portugal. So we're talking the counties of... Exactly. Lamego, Viseu, Coimbra. He also begins picking away at the territories of the Taifas of Toledo, Zaragoza, Badajoz, I think it's Badajoz. I would say Badajoz, and Sevilla in modern Spain. Sevilla. Ceviche. Do you like a nice ceviche? When the fish is raw, but you cook it with the citrus. It's very, very nice.
Folks, it's okay. I'm Portuguese. We can make fun of all of this. We can do the voices.
Cool. It's cool. I think it would be fine either way, dude. I think if you're talking about like white Europeans, you can still be a little be a little racist.
Yeah. Europeans are allowed a little racism as a
Bienvenido
treat against each other.
Yeah, it's cool. It's
cool.
So this is genuinely considered. This is generally considered to be the sort of genuine, actual beginning of the Reconquista.
Yeah.
Berend makes it clear, however, that. Despite the modern notion of Reconquista stretching as far back in our tale as the initial Arab-Berber conquest of Iberia in the 8th century, and to some people it extends as far ahead as the eventual final ousting of the last Muslim ruler from Grenada in the late 15th century, 1491 actually, Ferdinand and Isabella, which to our American listeners, particularly our Italian American listeners, you're going to know what happened in 1492, baby. Columbus sails the ocean blue. So the kings of Spain needed to keep fighting, to keep making money. And they were like, what can we conquer? We've finally reconquered Iberia. Yeah. So they're like, let's go find something else. And that's
let's do some really bad things to people in a different
continent. Dude. We've been doing bad things forever. That's all we know how to do. Like, we got to find new people to do bad shit to.
Yeah.
And, that's literally the impetus for, like, the age of exploration and, like, the European age of imperialism. Yeah. It's really cool how all this shit ties together. Cool in air quotes. It's interesting.
The money must flow, you know?
Yeah, dude, the spice must flow. But at least historians tend to take the Reconquista up through like the 13th, 14th centuries. Yep. There wasn't really a unifying ideal for Christian lords thinking about things that way during Rodrigo's life. So in the time we're talking about, nobody was talking about the Reconquista. Nobody was saying we gotta fucking unite under the Christian banner of the Pope and like no, everybody was fighting everybody.
Yeah.
The Reconquista is really the product of hindsight and some careful social manipulation, which is going to be kind of one of the overarching subjects, especially when we get into next week when we're talking about the film, which, you know, has a really interesting production history. And then when we dive back into this and we start transitioning from talking about, you know, the actual like life and times of El Cid, and we start talking about more recent sort of propaganda and historiography and changing of the narrative. And we talk a little bit about it here when we talk about like the poem of El Cid and the Historia Roderici, which is like one of the big medieval histories of El Cid, already in like the 12 and 1300s. people are starting to kind of get a hold of this story and turn it into something different.
Yeah.
But really, in the modern age, in the 20th century, is when things go like batshit off the rails.
Yeah.
So despite individuals like Fernando el Primero of Leon making the first major conquests of Muslim lands, it was still far more likely in the 11th century for Christian rulers to die or to be deposed by their fellow Christian lords than at the hands of an Arab or a Berber. Berend again cites the example of Bermudo III of Leon, who was initially briefly deposed by Sancho III, another Sancho, of Pamplona in 1034, then regained his throne before being killed and deposed again by his brother-in-law, Fernando. Fernando would later go on in 1054 to kill his own brother, Garcia Sanchez III, who had inherited the now Kingdom of Pamplona, and had also helped Fernando acquire the Kingdom of Leon, and absorb all of that into his, or parts of his lands into the growing Kingdom of Leon Castile. So it's a free-for-all. Right? Like, if that felt hard for you to follow, it's hard for everyone to follow. Like, everybody's, like, almost constantly just like, yeah, you want to team up and fucking fight this guy? And then immediately being like, okay, we want to fight each other, and that other guy that we fought before is going to help one of us. Like, it's nuts.
Yep.
And the point of me saying that is that none of this was part of any, like, grand religious plan orchestrated by, like, the Pope or the Catholic kings as some kind of, like, unified force to oust the Moors or whatever. It's just, it's a conflict. Yeah. On the contrary, conflict with the Taifas was often the perfect distraction needed to ambush your fellow Christian lords, as happened in 1058, when Fernando I, who was campaigning against the Taifa of Toledo, was sucker punched by Sancho Garces IV,
so we got a Garcia
Sancho.
Sanchez and a Sancho Garces.
Yeah,
dude, every time Garces comes up in here, I just remember, I don't know if you remember this dude, Rich Garces, he was like a fat, ugly relief pitcher who became famous with the Red Sox like in the late 90s, early 2000s, whose nickname was El Guapo. Dude, for all of our fans at home, I want you to look up a picture of this guy right now.
I'm gonna look him up right now.
Yeah, dude, like famously just butt fucking ugly. And his nickname was El Guapo. Yeah, I always think of that every time Garces comes up in here.
Oh yeah, hell yeah,
dude. Okay.
Yeah, he looked like a little boy with a mustache.
Yeah.
Dude, back then especially, you could just be fat and like play professional baseball. It was really
fucking,
awesome.
David Wells, that was the big one too. Yeah, just like beer gut David Wells, dude, fucking bald. Dude looked like he was in his 50s from the time he was like 29. Like he just looks like your neighbor that's just getting banged up in his garage.
Not the person
working
you look
on
at,
his
old
like his old fucking piece of shit car. Just toss him back, Reeves.
And it's like, believe it or not, that right there is a professional athlete
who like had like a long, like very good career.
Well, especially David Wells. Yeah, he was awesome.
Yeah,
he was a monster. Yeah. So it's like, whatever, dude. He's putting the ball over the plate, brother. Yeah, he's getting the K's. What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
All right. So Sancho Garces of Pamplona, he tries invading Leon Castile while Fernando is away fighting in the south.
Yeah.
Berend cites countless more examples, but I'm going to save you the hassle and just say it was every man for himself in Iberia in the 11th century.
Yeah.
And lords of both faiths were as likely to be allies as enemies in any given conflict.
So are you telling me that the sickos on like Twitter and shit like that, who are like, they got like all the Crusader shit in their bio and all talking about how, well, you know, the Iberian lords, you know, they did the Reconquista to push out all those Muslims. You know, they took back their land. Why can't we do that here and deport every Mexican and Muslim? Are you saying that they maybe don't have the best handle on history?
Yes, Evan, I am saying that is likely true. I'm going to go on the record as saying not only that, but I think that almost everybody in this country has a pretty shoddy grasp of history.
That might even be a generous way to put it.
Believe it or not, when we're talking about culture myths, like the Reconquista, and the way that it has been shaped into this like defining Iberian identity story, the tie-in to our own tendency as Americans to grasp onto things of that nature. You know, think about like the glorified romantic narratives around the Civil War. It's the same shit.
Yeah.
And we love it here. We love it so much because it's badass. And we love, like, the fucking epic movie version of history.
Yeah.
You know, we love a Braveheart. Which, like, admittedly, you know, as a person of, like, Scottish descent, that movie fucks.
Yeah. Or
like, the Portuguese diaspora could never comprehend the radness of having a Braveheart. But you don't have a movie like that.
Yeah.
You don't have a movie like that, dude. You don't have a movie about, like, the fucking best cod fisherman. Like, you don't have that shit. And if you did, you'd be like, this is the sickest movie ever.
I feel like this has taken a turn in a way that I did not.
You said before that we could say this stuff. So, I mean, I'm just saying, I'm confused. Do I have permission or not?
Now it's kind of just you saying these things. Now it's taking on a bit of a different tone here.
I'm just saying, if you had your own Braveheart, you'd love it.
Well, we do. It's El Cid. You know what I'm saying?
He's not. We both know that he wasn't from Portugal, brother.
Come on, man. It's kind of the same thing at this point. You know.
Okay, so you acknowledge that it's the same thing? Are you going on the record as a Portuguese man saying that it's all the same thing?
At this point in time, it's kind of
okay,
kind of one thing. But no, what I will say, folks, for you should read Don Quixote for the way that, like, being obsessed with, like, certain, like, culture myths of the past can drive you fucking insane and do, like, unbelievably moronic things that everybody will look at you and go, yo, that dude's pretty fucking outside his mind.
Yeah, he's bugging.
Like, this dude is outside his motherfucking mind right now. He's fucking, like, just, I mean, I'm not even gonna, but you should read Don Quixote, because reading too much into these things can black pill you, you know?
Yeah, it'll get you acting wrong.
Yeah, it'll get you going around the countryside with a poor fat short man named Sancho who's just drinking olive oil and shitting all over himself, and then you gotta smell that.
All is good for you, dude. All right. So anyway. Okay, so I could write 100 pages just about the back and forth and the shifting borders and stuff. And believe me, there's going to be more, like, getting into that, but there's so much more of it going on that I'm not going to explicitly discuss. But luckily for all of us, many people have already done that and written books. So I'm just going to bring El Cid directly into the story with some broad strokes. So Fernando I of Leon Castile, as we've now hopefully established, was kind of a major power player. And as was so common during these days before, primogeniture laws, he had a gaggle of kids to ensure his legacy. However, as the Iberian Christian kings generally still followed Germanic partition traditions when it came to inheritance, his death meant that war was essentially inevitable.
Hold on a second. So are we talking Gavelkind?
I don't know. I forget. What is Gavelkind?
Oh, is Gavelkind now? Oh, man, it's been so long since I played CK3. Is that not?
All right, no more CK3. Shut up. No more CK3.
It's just like a famous,
I remember it
meme
from
CK2, Gavelkind's just always fucking returning to Gavelkind.
Yeah. It's you build up, like, this kingdom or whatever, and then all of a sudden everything
between every single son, and then you have to fight for it every fucking time,
yeah.
Gavelkind, son of a bitch.
Man. So anyway, so they're still partitioning everything mostly equally between their kids. Yeah, so when Fernando I dies in 1065, his eldest son, named Sancho II, inherited his primary title of Castile. Alfonso VI got Leon, and Garcia II got Galicia, which Fernando had brought under his sway.
Yeah.
With these inheritances came the right to various parias, which we established as the term for those, like, tributary contracts with the taifas, that Fernando had established during his reign. So Saragossa, Toledo, Badajoz, Sevilla. Obviously, there can only be one ruler. So immediately, the bros are fighting.
Yeah.
So Sancho and Alfonso, big brother, middle brother, gang up, and they exile little brother Garcia to Sevilla. So he's gone.
Yeah.
Then big brother Sancho turns on middle brother Alfonso, imprisons him. He does ultimately release him after Urraca, their sister, intervened, but Alfonso is sent off to exile in Toledo.
Yeah.
Sancho then goes to war against Urraca and besieges her inherited holdings at the castle of Zamora. Mm-hmm. And as Baron puts it, he'd already beaten 2 kings and his brothers. Why would he be afraid of his little sister? But, oops, someone fucking ganks him during the siege, hired by parties unknown, who almost certainly had the same dad as him, whoever did it. Like, definitely a sibling of some sort.
Yeah.
Legend has it that Urraca, his sister, sent a knight to fake defect.
Yep.
And while ostensibly showing Sancho a weak spot in the defenses, Sancho was like, I gotta rip a piss. He goes to take a fucking hot steamer and gets fucking knifed and killed.
Nice.
So Alfonso VI then conveniently returns from exile and with Urraca's support assumes the mantle of kingship. Little Garcia was still imprisoned, sorry. So now, Alfonso, as the story goes, Alfonso VI, he wasn't happy with this new, improved kingdom of Leon, Castile, and Galicia, and had ambitions to declare himself Emperor of Hispania and restore the borders of the old Visigothic kingdom, which were essentially the entire peninsula.
Yeah.
He also expanded his system of parias, reportedly reaching as far south as the massively wealthy Taifa of Granada. Contemporary Muslim sources describe Alfonso as greedy and cunning, and knowing that he could not easily actually outright conquer the southern Taifas, he was content to extract extremely large annual tributes from them and play them against one another to keep them divided. So he was really deft at making as much money as possible to kind of keep the Taifas broke, and also like never allowing individual Taifa lords to get too powerful and present a real challenge. So if he had to, he was happy to team up with one to go fight the other and then switch sides next year and do the opposite, you know?
Yep.
He did have one major conquest highlight. He conquered Toledo, which was the Visigothic capital of Hispania. Mm-hmm. And finally, after a few centuries, returned that to Christian control and incorporated it into his realm. I don't think he made it his capital, but it was still a major point of prestige to have reconquered Toledo.
Yeah.
He posed such a threat to the southern Taifa lords, who were alarmed at his increasing adoption of the imperial title in official correspondence. They were so concerned for their future well-being that they were willing to reach out to a foreign ruler for help. And seeing that the other Christian rulers to the north would likely balk at their requests, they were forced to look south across the Strait of Gibraltar. So they appealed for help to the Almoravids, a nomadic Berber clan from modern Morocco, who had come to dominate northwestern Africa after the collapse of the Umayyad Caliphate. Just to remind everybody, it gets a little confusing. The Umayyad Caliphate, when I refer to that, is referring to the period of time when the Umayyad clan was dominating the entire Muslim caliphate that spread out of Arabia, conquered North Africa, and into Hispania. Following that, the Umayyad clan was confined to Iberia and for a time referred to themselves as caliphs in Iberia, and we refer to that as the Caliphate of Cordoba. So the Umayyad family was around and was a big deal for a long time, but just to differentiate, when we say the Umayyad Caliphate, we're talking about the whole big thing. When we talk about the Caliphate of Cordoba, that's the Umayyad Caliphate, confined explicitly to Iberia. So known to Western historians as the Almoravids, these Berbers were distinguished from the Arab elite of the Iberian Taifa by their distinctive dress, with even men wearing veils below their eyes, and their strict adherence to the conservative Maliki school of Islamic law. Yep. In 1086, under the Almoravid leader Yusuf ibn Tashfin, the combined forces of North African Berbers and the armies of the Taifas gathered in Iberia to prepare an invasion of the north to reverse the gains made by Fernando I and his son Alfonso VI. Alfonso, cunning ruler that he was, attempted a surprise attack of these combined invaders at Sagrajas in October 23rd, 1086. That'll come back as an important date. We'll reference that later in the episode. But despite their advantage of timing and position, these Almoravids meant serious business, and Alfonso ends up suffering one of the worst defeats of his entire reign, an absolutely crushing blow dealt by the Almoravids. A Muslim chronicler claimed that the zealous Almoravids beheaded every dead polytheist, which is what they called Catholics who were Trinitarians and believed in the Trinitarian splitting of the Godhead. And they found and stacked their heads into minarets, from which the muezzins, who are the people that call to the prayers, the daily 5 prayers or whatever, that Muslims have. They issued their calls to prayer from the top of these minarets made of human heads for the next 3 days. And probably didn't happen.
Yeah, but we do
like
love
shit
a
like
minaret
this
here. We do love a minaret here at Left on the
Yeah, minarets are cool.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before, like especially with the Mongols. Like stories like this served a really important role when it came to propagandizing and scaring your enemies. I don't think it was practical, and I don't think that people were doing shit quite this gross. I mean, people were doing gross shit. Torture was real, and beheadings and all that stuff. I don't think anybody was stacking the heads into minarets, but who knows? Maybe this happened. It would be really, really gross, but maybe it happened. So Yusuf returns then to North Africa after winning this battle to deal with the succession crisis. One of his sons, his heir, died, and so obviously things were unstable. So he had to go back to his own realm and kind of like set things straight. But calls for further Almoravid aid begin pouring in from the various taifas. Yusuf initially continued to offer aid as an outside ruler without like any ambition of himself exerting direct control over the peninsula. He was kind of content to just be like the dominant Muslim power to the south that was, able to kind of exert some influence. He didn't necessarily want to administer. But it appears he quickly began to realize that none of the gains he bought with the lives of his men would amount to much if the Taifas themselves continued to fight amongst one another just as much as they fought against the Christians. So he's pretty quickly becoming really frustrated, not only with the Christians, who he's coming to view as, kind of filthy barbarians, but he's also becoming really frustrated with his fellow Muslims, these Arab leaders of the Taifas in Iberia.
Yep.
Finally, after a failed attempt on his part to retake Toledo in 1090, where none of the Taifa lords sent any troops to help him, even though he was trying to take their city back for him, it's kind of like in CK3 when you have allies in a war and they send armies, but then they just stand there and they don't fucking help you and they run away from fights.
Well, like, you try to levy troops and they're like, we'll give you like 10% of where we go.
Yeah.
And it's like, fucking cocksucker, dude. You little son of a... I gave you that duchy.
That being said...
That duchy.
Do you ever send people to help other people in wars? No, I agree to go, and I almost never actually send people. So, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, or like I'll just be like, this little asshole.
But then again, that's a computer. That's not real. I'm an actual human being. Help me, man.
No, but sometimes I do. Like if I got like a good ally. Now sometimes these allies, they're like, oh, this dude's mad strong. I'm just gonna keep starting wars. And you're like, dude, I've bailed you out like 2 times here. It's been like 10 years. Why don't you fucking pump the brakes for a minute, okay? Yeah. I got my own shit going on. I don't need to be sending my guys across.
And let's be real, my borders are expanding. I'm probably going to be conquering you myself in not that long. So
stop fucking calling my banners, man.
so he's upset, right?
Yeah.
He's like, I came to take Toledo back for you, and I called you all to help me, and nobody showed up. I bought all this pizza, and I bought all these sodas, and nobody's fucking here.
Yeah.
So he decided that these whining ingrates would have to be dealt with before any real progress could be made against the infidels in the north. The lords of the Taifas had grown fat and lazy and complacent. They were drinking wine and fornicating and getting fat in their rich little city-states, and Yusuf ibn Tashfin was going to restore them to the true and purifying light of Islam. So by the end of that year, he didn't even leave the peninsula. He pivoted, and he'd conquered Granada. He conquered Malaga. By 1092, he conquered Murcia, Aledo, Denia, Játiva, and Alcira. In 1094, he conquered Badajoz. In 1097, he levied another crushing defeat of Alfonso VI. By the end of the 11th century, start of the 12th century, the Almoravids had effectively conquered every single Taifa and also reconquered a good bit of the lands that Alfonso had conquered back from them, minus Toledo. They never got Toledo back.
Yeah.
This was of great concern to European Christians, including the Pope and the other kings of Christendom. The violent religious fervor of the Maliki Berbers began to be countered with a similar rise in the glorification of brutal violence in Catholic doctrine. Religious iconography of the era frequently depicts armed angels. You know, we're seeing angels with swords, wearing armor, engaged in battle, in holy warfare. And the notion that Christian knights committing acts of unspeakable violence could actually obtain salvation in return for these acts, provided that they were carried out against the pagan enemies of the faith. Mm-hmm. The idea that slaughtering the foes of God was not just forgivable, but was now good and commendable, reached an absolute high point, again mirroring the increasingly extreme prejudice shown by Almoravid troops in their struggle to bring Iberia back under unified control. So both sides of this struggle are reaching kind of a frenzy point of religious fervor and glorification of war and battle. It sort of reaches its high point in the late 11th and into the early 12th centuries, as Alfonso VI was waging his wars of conquest and Yusuf ibn Tashfin was responding in kind. So these two guys are kind of the big power players of the era. And this is the sort of scene where, you know, the lead up to this Almoravid conquest, we're gonna back up just a little bit now. This is sort of the scene where El Cid, a guy like El Cid, and literally El Cid, could kind of make a name for himself. So we're gonna finally get back to talking about him, and we're gonna talk about him for the remaining half of this episode.
Yep.
So in the last episode, we mentioned El Cid being born in the mid to late 1040s under the rule of Fernando of Leon Castile. And while his specific childhood is a mystery, he was potentially raised alongside Fernando's own children at court and would later be elevated to knighthood by Sancho II during his brief time as king.
Yep.
Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, El Cid, would personally lead Sancho II's retinue in battle during the civil wars against Alfonso. And after serving the crown loyally, his transfer of service to Alfonso after he took the crown was accepted. It was at this point that we know that Rodrigo married his wife Jimena. While legends like La Poema de Mio Cid claimed Jimena was Alfonso's niece, offered in marriage as appreciation for transferring his allegiance, it is not known what her precise line of descent to the ruling family was, but it is widely accepted that she was connected in some way, and that this was a prestigious marriage for young Rodrigo.
Yep.
This likely occurred in around 1074. Some people say 1076. Some people say as late as 1079. There are multiple surviving copies of the wedding charter detailing the transfer of properties offered to Jimena as a sort of dowry that we still have today. And in Leonese custom, a husband essentially would split and give up to half of his properties to his new wife upon marriage. Sort of like a pre-prenup. She gets half right off the bat. Mm-hmm. This document gives us a clue as to the rank that Rodrigo had achieved by this time, in his late 20s or early 30s, as he gifted Jimena parts of 34 villages and 3 entire ones, as well as a monastery, all across the realm of Castile. This also confirms Rodrigo's membership in the ranks of the high nobility of the realm. So he's not some, like, rough and tumble, like, commoner or lesser noble, as would kind of later be claimed, and it makes for maybe a better story. He's not like a plucky rags to riches guy. He's a riches to more riches guy.
Yep.
He worked mainly as a sort of enforcer for Alfonso. So he would ride around, he would collect parias from Taifa lords, and he would whip them into shape when they refused to pay. He also signed official documents as a court witness. We have his surviving signature now that we can look back and say he was present at a lot of these events. He acted as an adjudicator in legal proceedings, and he was present at the famous Council of Burgos in 1080 when the Kingdom of Leon formally adopted the Roman liturgy promoted by Pope Gregory VII over the local Mozarabic tradition, which, remember, is like the sort of Iberian strain of vulgar Latin that was popular at the time. So he wasn't some peripheral member of court, but he was likely a trusted advisor and commander for Alfonso VI. However, if the shifting landscape I've described thus far is any indication, making big boy moves is a quick way to get powerful enemies, and this came to pass for Rodrigo in 1079 CE. So this is smack in the middle of Alfonso VI's grand victory tour through the Taifas, and about 7 years before Yusuf ibn Tashfin and his Almoravids would officially get involved. Rodrigo was out on a mission to the Taifa of Sevilla to collect parias for Alfonso, when the lord of the Taifa of Granada attacked Sevilla, accompanied by various Christian allies. So naturally, Rodrigo joins up with the armies of Sevilla to defend the interest of his lord in the region. Ostensibly, as we've said, the parias are protection money, right? So it's time to justify those payments. You know what I mean? You are paying us to protect you, and these people are attacking you. So, of course, I'm here. I will fight in your army. What complicated this was the precise makeup of the Granadan forces, which actually included several other of Alfonso's vassals who had been contracted for assistance in the attack as part of the convoluted system of tributaries and raids that dominated the peninsula. So here Rodrigo Diaz is, not embroiled in some cut-and-dry Christian versus Muslim battle, but fighting as a Christian constituent of a nominally Muslim army, fighting against another Muslim army supported by Christian knights, many of whom served the same king as him. Mm-hmm. It's bonkers.
That's just the way the medieval world works, folks.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's messy, and it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah,
but you got to do your duty. Although oftentimes you didn't, but you gotta.
Don't let anybody else find out you didn't.
Yeah.
That's more important.
Yeah, if you're not gonna do it, you better
cover your ass.
Yeah, exactly.
You better keep those pauldrons shiny, brother. So Rodrigo's side won, and Rodrigo himself, by all accounts, fought bravely and well, taking many valuable captives, including high-ranking other members of Alfonso's court. So these were all gradually ransomed for cash. He actually transferred, I think, all of the... he let everybody go. But he got a lot of money for it. And aside from parias, this is one of the main money-making schemes of the era. But they never forgot their humiliation at the hands of their fellow countrymen. They're angry at him. Even though they were attacking one of their king's own client states... They're really mad that Rodrigo beat them and captured them. But again, you can't really trust this because a lot of this comes from sources that are like very clearly pro-Rodrigo. And so there's a lot of this like, they were just all jealous because he was so fucking awesome. You know, like, yeah. Who knows, man? So while Alfonso did not seem initially too upset at the time, these slippery little snakes began whispering to the king that the upstart Rui Diaz was growing too powerful and aspired to an independent fiefdom. And honestly, they were probably right. Like, why the fuck not? That's what literally everyone is after. Alfonso's dad did that, you know? Who's to stop somebody who gets strong enough from killing the king and becoming the king himself? That's like the name of the game. So in 1081, after a Muslim raid on Castile that included some of Rodrigo's holdings, cost him a ton of money and hostages, our hero, El Cid, he strikes out for revenge. Now, this isn't problematic in and of itself, but the issue is that he didn't wait or ask for permission from his king, Alfonso, and his target, Toledo, not yet officially ceded at this point to Leon Castile, was one of the king's client states and nominally off limits to attack. Alfonso could not risk destabilizing the already precarious system of tributaries he had built into his empire, and so his only recourse was to act. Rodrigo was exiled from the realm and stripped of his official titles, beginning the next major phase of his life, which would come to define his career, that of the wandering mercenary warlord. Thus begins a long period in the life of Rui Diaz de Vivar, El Cid, where he begins to look more and more like the poster boy for the overarching violence and chaos of his time. Now, exile was a common punishment in medieval Iberia and was not always binding or permanent. It was a sort of intermediate level punishment that allowed a king to properly admonish a vassal without eliminating the possibility of engaging his services again at a later date, and that fits the Reconquista mold pretty nicely. While in theory it was a punishment, it also offered an enterprising military man some unique opportunities to make a name for himself and earn some serious scratch, if he was of the disposition.
Yeah.
And El Cid, as we've said, was definitely of the disposition. So rather than diminishing the flame of his legend, his exile ends up being like a dumped bucket of gasoline on the fire, because my boy is about to take off. Think of it like LeBron leaving Cleveland to go win rings in Miami, right?
He's taking his talent, so...
Yeah, he's taking his talents elsewhere. So after bouncing around a bit, he goes up to Barcelona. That guy's like, nah, I'm not interested. That'll come back to bite him. Fuck Barcelona. Rodrigo winds up in the Taifa of Zaragoza, where he would wind up signing a lucrative deal with the local lord, a guy named Al-Muqtadir. Now, Spanish revisionists don't like calling their brave boy a mercenary because it sounds bad, and we have a lot of modern associations with that term, which are overwhelmingly negative, often for good reason.
Yep.
So they call him a fucking salaried vassal, which is, I think, pretty funny. Yeah. But, I mean, he was signing up to kill for money. Yeah. So let's be super real. He was a mercenary leader, and that's what he's doing. Mm-hmm. He had left his wife, Jimena, and their children behind in Castile. Probably. It's actually not super clear. There's all sorts of claims about them, like, going off to a monastery, but those claims were written by that monastery who, like, wanted to be involved in the El Cid. So, who knows? They're not with him. Mm-hmm. Right? And he's here to just stack bread, fucking make money.
Yeah.
Nere sastana qam liktifo timidiwan la tasnit la dashakwa inayan warani sinjay tisana tabarat sukoz taran daghshinawan nere sastana qam liktifo timidiwan la tasnit la dashakwa inayan warani sinjay tisana tabarat sukoz taran daghshinawan.
So Al-Muqtadir of Zaragoza was a shrewd leader. He ruled a grand realm, as evidenced by surviving palace ruins and some contemporary documents detailing, the sort of grandeur of his lands. And his primary Christian rival at the time was actually the king of Aragon, not Leon Castile. So this would represent a nice little gig for Rodrigo and would not ostensibly put him directly at odds with his former lord, Alfonso. Because if he wants to ever go back, he can't just be, immediately, going to war with his own former king. However, Al-Muqtadir was old, and he died soon after Rodrigo's deal was struck, dividing his lands between his two sons. And you got to remember these guys. Yusuf al-Mutamin and Mundir al-Khaib. Okay. So as al-Mutamin was left with Zaragoza proper, the city itself, which gave the Taifa its name, Rodrigo entered into his service. Al-Khaib, however, entered into parias deals with King Sancho Ramirez, different Sancho, it's like our fifth Sancho, of Aragon, and Count Berenguer Ramon II of Barcelona.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah, dude, and war breaks out.
Yeah.
So right away, it's time for Rodrigo to earn that paycheck. So he became particularly known during this time for his ability to fortify and defend a fort. He is one of the preeminent defensive fighters of his time. Yeah. He knows when to cut and run, but he also knows how to hold a castle. And it becomes basically accepted that if you are trying to besiege a fort and Rui Diaz is holding it, you're in for a fucking slog.
Yeah.
He does this successfully several times during this conflict. Yeah. During one such siege, when the odds looked really grim, Rodrigo advised his lord to pay his brother off to lift the siege. He said, listen, like, this is looking like a really tough fight. You should just pay him and we should revise our situation here.
Yeah.
But Al-Haib, who saw victory as all but assured, he refuses. And he says, nah, we're taking the city. So Rodrigo is forced to rally his men, and they rush out of the city, and they fight a pitched battle against the combined forces of Al-Haib, the Kingdom of Aragon, and the County of Barcelona. Rodrigo ended up carrying the day in a stunning come-from-behind. He takes tons of booty, and he captures Count Berenguer of Barcelona himself, which is, like, big.
Yeah.
So I'll truncate the rest of this for time, but Rodrigo would go on to serve with increasing distinction under the Lord of Zaragoza for about 5 years, with his prestige and honor and treasury growing with every victory. He became an expert not only in fighting defensively, but also in the lightning cavalry raids that earned a caballero, which is like the Spanish word for a knight, his income and paid his men. He repeatedly rebuffed attacks from both Barcelona and Aragon, and secured treaties with both rulers that ensured protection for Zaragoza, at least for the time being. So he whooped them both enough that the King of Aragon and the Count of Barcelona were like, all right, dude, you get like 2 years off. Like, I'm not fighting you anymore. He continued to serve Al-Mutamin's son and heir in Zaragoza, clearly showing no religious qualms about who or where he was fighting as long as the pay was good. It was not until the Almoravids began harassing Alfonso's borders. So remember, we talked about, this time period, the Almoravids come. They're starting to, like, really give Alfonso a run for his money. That Rodrigo's old liege will come knocking. He's talking about reconciliation and a return to service as a knight of Leon Castile. Specifically, following that major defeat that Alfonso suffered in 1086 at Sagrajas. Remember, he tried to surprise attack and still got whooped.
Yep.
Alfonso was taking basically every able-bodied warrior he could. He was recruiting up into France. He was sending overseas to Italy. Any knight that was willing to serve, he was taking him. So the fact that, somebody like El Cid, who's now made quite a name for himself as one of these guys, these fucking guys who can win fights, he seemed kind of an obvious choice. So LeBron is back in Cleveland.
Yep.
You'd think, or hope, that our brave hero was elated at the opportunity to be reunited with his wife, Jimena, and his children. But this is just not the sort of stuff that medieval chronicles thought to preserve for us, so I have no idea. He'd been away for 5 years. If you know anything about medieval history, he probably was doing bad stuff to ladies, so I don't know, man. I don't know what to tell you. Who knows? He's back with his family. Theoretically, that's a good thing.
He probably was not a semen retention warrior.
No, dude. No, he probably was not. I don't know, though. We don't know. So you can't really speculate beyond what your imagination can provide for you. It seems that by the next year, 1087, he was back performing all of his old duties at court. And in 1088, he was put in direct charge of handling the Parias contract with the Taifa of Valencia and its ruler, a guy named Al-Qadir, who by now had been a lackey of Alfonso's for a decade or more. And I think Al-Qadir was the original guy who was like the Lord of Toledo, and he succeeded Toledo to, I don't know, I got it all mixed up. There's a lot of guys going on with a lot of Al names and a lot of Sanchos. But he's now at this point in Valencia, and he needs a new bodyguard or whatever to handle his contract. So Rodrigo is installed there. And of course, his old nemesis Al-Haib, who's that treacherous brother from Zaragoza, decides to lay siege to Valencia almost as soon as Rodrigo is installed as being in charge of defending that Taifa. Which is interesting. So Al Cid, he's no longer in the employ of Al-Haib's nephew, the Lord of Zaragoza. He still goes to his old liege for pay as an ally, and the two combine their forces and they crush Al-Haib's besieging force. So this highlights El Cid's kind of charisma and his ability to forge lasting alliances across religious lines without the explicit promise of pay. So he served so well that when he went back and was like, hey, listen, do you want to help me like team up and fight your uncle? He's like, yeah, fuck yeah, dude. You were always the shit. Like, let's do it.
Yeah.
So clearly he was an able and charismatic commander beyond his willingness to fight for gold, and his record of loyal service to Zaragoza was not forgotten. Granted, it did probably help that there's like a long-standing blood feud at play here, but still, it is noteworthy. Mm-hmm. It's also important to remember, though, that you can never trust a medieval Iberian alliance for long. So upon Rodrigo's return to Castile, Almustahin, I think it's Almustahin II, allied himself to Rodrigo's old enemy, Count Berenguer II of Barcelona, that treacherous pig dog, and himself laid siege to Valencia. So, although Rodrigo managed to return in time to negotiate with Berenguer, he was able to convince him to return home, this still shows the treachery involved here. Mm-hmm. But it also shows that he has tremendous personal pull beyond that of a regular knight in service to the king. People know who he is, so he's just some dude, but he's like personally negotiating with counts. Granted, the county of Barcelona at this point is as powerful as most kingdoms in this region, so some of these titles, they get a little confusing, but the Count of Barcelona is an independent ruler. He's not, subordinate to anybody. And El Cid has tremendous personal pull. So he's also enriching himself immensely by forging, his own parisa contracts with neighboring lords. He's collecting tribute for himself, not just for Alfonso. So people are paying him now at this point. Like, yeah, there's people that are paying him to pay the king, but he's also got people that are just straight up paying him not to fuck with them. And he's also got tons of land, and he starts to fortify his own fortresses and other lands in his charge, and preparing them for external assault by anyone, Muslim or Christian. With this increase in wealth and prestige came a greater ability to recruit, equip, and maintain the loyalty of men-at-arms. And I have a quick quote that I'd like to read from the book here that kind of highlights that. Acquiring ever more riches from raids and tribute he collected from Muslims over the years, Rodrigo could reward his followers lavishly, and so he assembled and maintained a host of loyal warriors. He was not alone in leading such a band of warriors. By the early 12th century, sources gave the name Caballeros Pardos, or Brown Knights, to the bands of commoners, mercenaries, and bandits who lived off raids and plunder. Religious allegiances were not among their concerns, as such groups included Christians and Muslims indiscriminately. According to the testimony of visual sources, such warriors rode on horseback, armed with powerful composite bows and swords, protected by chainmail and gambesons, thick padded jackets that provided some protection. The troops of Rodrigo probably included such warriors, and many entered his service permanently. The personal army he built up became a powerful force on the local scene. He was thus able to conduct raids against all those not paying tribute to him. Storehouses in Valencia were filled with the booty he collected. A growing network of local lords depended on his protection in exchange for payments. Soon, Al-Qadir himself was paying tribute directly to Rodrigo. So, he's going out of his way, despite the fact that he's returned to service under Alfonso, he's going out of his way to kind of act in a manner that any medieval liege would probably find alarming in one of their vassals. Mm-hmm. He's going native, folks. He's setting himself up like an independent lord in a way that's starting to look definitely like those other vassals who were whispering in Alfonso's ear were probably right. This guy is probably trying to like do his own thing.
Yeah.
He's clearly amassing a great deal of personal wealth and prestige with a military force and alliances which would make it increasingly difficult to exert control over him. So as Berend puts it, in modern parlance, he exploited the possibilities of being a local strongman and built a side hustle. I think that this scholarly lady was just excited to say side hustle in her book, but I did like that little quote. Another break with his lord was probably...
Of our times.
The parlance. Another break with his lord was probably inevitable at this point, so it should not have come as a surprise when, after only a few years back, Rodrigo again had a major falling out with Alfonso, which resulted in a return to exile. Mm-hmm. So in 1089, when an Almoravid-led coalition of Berber and Taifa troops laid siege to the city of Aledo, who were at this point prospective clients of Alfonso, the defenders of that city reached out to the king for aid, which he magnanimously and graciously accepted. And he ordered Rodrigo to meet up with the army that he was personally leading that was en route to the city to lift the siege. Now, surviving accounts of this differ, and are all definitely sketchy. The most well-known, which comes from the Historia Roderici, which is, as I said, an unabashedly pro-El Cid biography, in heavy air quotes, which was written a century or more after Rodrigo's death, paints an almost comical picture of misunderstanding and injustice on the part of the king. According to this account, Rodrigo immediately and obediently responded to the summons. However, the king's messenger was vague and had not told him precisely where the royal army was. So, Rodrigo sent out 3 scouts to find them, but they all missed the advancing army. And by the time he realizes where the army was, they're already 40 kilometers away. The siege of Aledo had already been lifted, and he missed the whole thing. Now, rather than continuing to march south and meet the king and be like, hey, sorry, I'm late, better late than never, he just turns around and goes home, and apparently was very sad that he missed such a fun battle, and doesn't expect there to be any repercussions. Alfonso, in the meantime, under the sway of his treacherous anti-Rodrigo courtiers, those snakes, he accuses Rodrigo of treason for failing to show. In fact, El Cid probably hoped that the evil Saracens would kill his king, and then he wouldn't even have to worry about him anymore. You don't even love me, El Cid. You don't even care if I live or die.
Do you even like me?
Am I even your favorite king? So he once again exiles Rodrigo, and this time he confiscates all his lands, or says he's going to, and his titles, and his vast treasuries. And he also captures Jimena and the children, and imprisons them, the dog. So it's hard to say whether or not this all really occurred as a misunderstanding, or if Rodrigo really was a disloyal vassal. The exile and all the consequences appear to have been totally real. Many of Rodrigo's men chose at this point to return to Castile and be reintegrated into the king's service elsewhere, which is pretty telling, because honor is really important. And so if his own men are looking at him like, I don't know if I'm with you on this, big dog.
Yeah.
And you combine that with the speed with which Alfonso was like, you know what, dude, fuck you, you're out. And the degree to which Rodrigo had been building up his own local independent infrastructure, they all sort of suggest that the king might not have been entirely in the wrong here. There's probably a good chance that our boy Rodrigo was pretty disloyal, or at the least not feeling super inclined to move with the quickness when the king called. But he does initially attempt to petition the king to kind of prove his innocence. He doesn't want to be exiled again. His first request was for a trial by combat between either himself or one of his loyal men and one of the king's own knights. Now, in medieval Europe, this was considered a perfectly acceptable method of determining the guilt or innocence of an accused party. Now, obviously, God, in his wisdom, would favor the innocent man and help provide for his victory. Alfonso obviously rejected this, maybe because he knew Rodrigo was famous as being a fucking badass, and he figured that he stands a good chance of winning a fight against pretty much anyone, regardless of God's thoughts on the matter. He did, however, initially release Jimena and the children, and he allows them to join Cid in exile. This next part kind of kills me. So his next recourse after demanding the trial by combat, he writes 4 separate appeals, all at the same time, and sends them all off at once. And they all kind of provide, different reasons for his innocence. So the first one, he's like, well, I didn't show because I didn't know what route you were taking. And if I'm lying, God, strike me down. Second, I actually didn't even know that you were even in your army yet and that you guys had even left yet. So I didn't even know that we were leaving yet.
Also didn't.
And if I'm lying, God, strike me down. And the third one, he's like, honestly, I found your letters to me confusing in the first place, and I think that maybe if you'd been a little more clear, there wouldn't have been this big communications breakdown. So I don't even know if I should be at fault for this. And if I'm lying, may God strike me down. And in the fourth one, he's like, I never even said anything bad about you until you imprisoned Jimena and my kids. I still like you, and I was only ever even mad at you because of that, dude. So I don't even know what this is all about. And if I'm lying, may God strike me down. So all of these are finished with an appeal to God, like I said, which I suppose he was adding to add hey, I wouldn't lie, dude, because if I lie, God will literally kill me, dude. And he was like, all of these are good. I just wrote you 4 perfectly good letters,
big, beautiful letters.
Pick one. Pick one of these and say it's true, and then everything's good, right? And Alfonso, surprisingly, was like, no, I don't like this. I don't like how you're going about this, and I don't believe you. The exile stands, and El Cid is on his own. And this time, it's probably for good.
Well,
so what's our brave hero going to do? Where's he going to go? What's he going to get up to?
Is he going to do?
It's been an hour already, okay, folks? There's more to it. and we're going to talk about it next time.
Yep.
We're going to talk more about El Cid next time. As I said, actually next time we're probably going to do a little detour because next week it's a holiday. It's also my birthday, and I don't want to sit and write quite this much. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch the movie El Cid. We're going to see how that narrative compares to what we're learning so far. We're also going to discuss the history behind the making of that film. And it's going to give us a little backstory into more modern reinterpretations of the El Cid narrative. And then following that, we're going to dive back into the story of El Cid, and then we're going to look a little bit more at some of the propagandizing that surrounds this story to this day, and like the far-reaching cultural impact that it's had. But that is it for this week.
Yep.
Thank you guys so much for listening.
Yep, thank you.
And Evan.
Yeah.
You want to take us out, brother? You want to bring us across the finish line?
Do the whole thing, yep. So, ladies, gentlemen, ladies, and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in once again to the Left Unread podcast. If you like this podcast and would like to help us out in some small but meaningful way, there's a few ways to do that. First of all, you can go to www.patreon.com/leftunread. You can go there and you can contribute a small monthly amount to help keep the podcast going. But wait, if you are on an Apple product, do not use the Patreon app, as Apple will charge you a 30% surcharge on whatever you donate to us. And we don't want you to do that. Nobody wants you to do that. Fuck Apple. So what you should do is open the Safari app. The Safari browser. Go to www.patreon.com/leftunread. Type that in and donate there. If you can't do that, that's okay. We know times are tough. Folks are living lean, so you can help us. You can help us another way. You can rate and review us on your podcast app of choice. That helps us get boosted in the algorithm. We love algorithms, don't we, folks? It helps us find new listeners. We also spread by word of mouth, so you can tell people about us. You can tell your family. You can tell your friends. You can tell your trifling vassals who are always plotting on you that, hey, you know what? Instead of calling your banners against your God-given lord, you can just listen to the Left Unread podcast and, kill time that way. You don't really need to. Don't
be an oath breaker, dude.
Yeah, don't be an oath breaker. Don't be raising and pillaging the little villages in my fiefdom.
Don't be an ungrateful vassal, dude.
Yeah, don't.
My authority
is given by God.
Is given by God, dude.
God.
I'm supposed to be in charge of you.
Yeah. The big man upstairs said so. So anyway, you can help us. You can help us in one of three, or if you come up with a different way to help us, let us know. But anyway, thank you once again for listening, and I suppose we will see you next week on another episode of
Left Unread, brother.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much. See you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. We'll see you next time. Bye.
مزيدر كالخال هركيش اسمي